Ethan had been sleeping lightly, his mind still half awake from a long shift at the repair docks. The space station was never truly silent. There was always the low hum of engines, the faint hiss of the air recyclers, the occasional creak of metal as the station shifted in the void. But this sound was different. It was soft, careful, and close. It came from the door to his small crew quarters. Ethan's eyes snapped open. For a moment, he thought he had imagined it. But then he heard it again. The faint sound of the door sliding just a little, like someone trying not to be noticed. He pushed himself up, his heart beating faster. No one had any reason to visit him this late. No one except trouble. The door opened just enough for a shadow to slip inside. At first, all he saw was movement, a shape in the dim light. Then the shadow paused, almost frozen, as Ethan's eyes adjusted. He saw her. It wasn't a thief or a soldier. It was a girl, but not a human girl. Her skin had a faint silver-blue glow, as if light lived beneath it. Her hair was long and strange, shifting in color from deep violet to a shade almost like starlight. Her eyes were large and bright, reflecting fear but also determination. She was dressed in thin, strange clothing, more like ceremonial wraps than anything practical. In her hands, she clutched a small pendant that glowed faintly. Ethan sat up slowly. "Who are you?" he whispered. The girl's gaze darted around the room, as if searching for danger. She opened her mouth, and a stream of soft words in an alien language spilled out. Ethan couldn't understand a thing. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes kept locking on him, almost pleading. He stood up cautiously, keeping his hands visible. "I don't understand you," he said. Speaking slowly, the girl blinked, then bit her lip, as if thinking hard. Finally, she whispered one word in broken English. "Help." Ethan froze. This was bad. If she was here asking for help, it meant she was in danger. And if she was in danger, then so was he. He took a step toward her, but she stepped back quickly, holding the pendant tighter. Then he heard its boots in the corridor outside. Heavy and purposeful, voices followed, sharp and commanding. The girl's eyes widened in panic. She rushed toward him, grabbing his sleeve with surprising strength. Her head shook violently, a clear signal. Don't tell them. Ethan didn't know what was going on. But he understood fear when he saw it. He grabbed the panel under his desk and yanked it open. Revealing a storage compartment, he pointed. Inside, she hesitated for a second, then crawled in, curling up into the small space. Her glowing pendant dimmed as she covered it with her hands. A second later, there was a loud knock on the door. Ethan forced his voice to stay calm. "Yeah? Who is it?" The door opened without waiting for an answer, and two uniformed station guards stepped inside. Their faces were expressionless, their eyes scanning every corner. One of them spoke first, his voice cold. "We're looking for a runaway asset. Have you seen anything unusual tonight?" Ethan shook his head. "Just me, sleeping after a long day," he said. The guards didn't look convinced. One of them stepped closer to the desk, his boots almost touching the hidden compartment. Ethan's stomach tightened. He forced a tired sigh and leaned back against the wall, pretending to be annoyed. "Look, if someone's causing trouble, I'm not part of it," he added. After a tense pause, the guard finally turned away. The two men left without another word, the door sliding shut behind them. Ethan waited several seconds, listening to the fading footsteps. Only when the sound was gone did he kneel and open the compartment. The girl crawled out slowly, her breathing fast and uneven. She looked at him with wide, grateful eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the station. Then, she whispered again, "Help. Please." Ethan had no idea who she was, where she came from, or why she had risked slipping into his room. But something deep inside told him that whatever he had just stepped into was far bigger than he realized. And it was only the beginning. Ethan stared at the strange alien girl standing in the middle of his small quarters. She was still trembling, her glowing pendant clutched tight in both hands. The light from it made her silver-blue skin seem even more unreal. She looked like she belonged in a royal hall or some strange alien temple, not hiding in a repairman's cabin. Ethan took a slow breath. "Okay, let's try this again," he said quietly, speaking slowly so she might understand. He pointed to himself, Ethan. Then he pointed to her. She tilted her head, hesitated, and then said softly, "Lyra." Her voice was musical, even when saying a single word. Now at least he had a name. Ethan tried to ask where she came from, but she shook her head and muttered words he didn't understand. Her hands moved as she spoke, tracing shapes in the air. One of them caught his attention. It was a symbol, simple but sharp. Ethan frowned. He had seen that symbol before. It was posted in warning signs all over the restricted science decks. It meant "Do not enter experimental containment." Lyra noticed his reaction and nodded quickly. Her eyes filled with urgency. She stepped closer and grabbed his wrist, trying to make him understand. She pointed toward the corridor outside and then made a motion as if she were locking a cage. Ethan's mind raced. Was she saying she had been locked up there? Before he could ask more, the sound of boots echoed faintly through the hall again. This time, they were closer. Lyra's eyes widened, and she grabbed his sleeve tightly. Ethan could feel her panic through her grip. It was the same fear he had seen in people running from explosions or gunfire, the kind that came from knowing what would happen if they were caught. The footsteps stopped outside his door. Ethan's stomach tightened. Then came a loud, metallic knock. Lyra froze, looking. Like a cornered animal, she shook her head quickly, silently pleading for him not to open. But another knock followed harder. This time, Ethan sighed loudly so whoever was outside could hear him. He opened the door just enough to peek out. The same two guards from earlier stood there. Faces grim. One of them held a small scanning device. "Sorry to bother you again," the taller one said, his tone sharp but forced polite. "We've had reports of movement in this sector. Mind if we check inside?" Ethan leaned on the doorframe, pretending to look tired and annoyed. "Nothing here but me. And I'm trying to get some rest," he replied. The guard narrowed his eyes, then glanced at his partner. They didn't push inside this time, but the way they lingered made Ethan's skin crawl. Finally, they turned away, muttering to each other as they walked down the hall. Ethan shut the door quickly and locked it. Lyra was still standing where he had left her. Breathing hard, when their eyes met, she gave a small nod, maybe a thank you. Ethan pulled out a chair and gestured for her to sit. She did. But she kept glancing toward the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. He tried again to ask questions, using hand gestures and pointing to things. He pointed at himself, then the door, then made a walking motion with his fingers, as if to say, "Should I take you somewhere?" She shook her head sharply. Then she pointed at herself, the pendant, and drew the same strange symbol again on the table. Finally, she pointed at the door and made the locking gesture again. Ethan pieced it together slowly. She had escaped from somewhere on this station, somewhere bad. And that pendant of hers was important. A sudden loud thump came from the hallway. Maybe a dropped crate. Maybe something else. But it made Lyra flinch violently. She looked at Ethan, eyes wide. With an unspoken message, "They're still looking for me." Ethan had been in trouble before, smuggling small tools between decks, bending station rules for friends. But this was different. Helping her could mean losing his job, his quarters, maybe even his freedom. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that sending her away would be worse. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, Lyra. You can stay here tonight," he said quietly. even though he knew she might only understand part of it. She tilted her head, studying his face, then gave a slow nod. The tension in her shoulders eased just a little. She took the pendant from around her neck and held it out toward him. Ethan shook his head, pushing it back gently. "Keep it," he said. Whatever it was, it clearly meant more to her than he could understand right now. She didn't argue. Instead, she curled up in the corner of the room, still watching the door. Ethan sat back on his bed, his mind full of questions and doubts. Somewhere deep in the station, alarms could be faintly heard, far away, but growing. Lyra's eyes flicked toward the sound, and Ethan knew this wasn't going to be a quiet night. Ethan didn't know how long he sat there, listening to the distant alarms echoing through the station. Lyra was still curled in the corner, clutching her glowing pendant, her wide eyes following every sound. The air in the room felt heavier now, as if danger was pressing against the walls. Ethan's instincts told him this couldn't last. They couldn't stay here forever. He stood up and walked to the door, pressing his ear against it. The corridor outside was quiet, but that quiet felt wrong. He turned back to Lyra. "We can't stay here," he whispered. She tilted her head, not understanding all the words. But his tone was enough. Her eyes narrowed in determination, and she got to her feet. Ethan opened the door a crack, peeking out. The hallway was dimly lit, emergency lights casting red shadows somewhere far down the corridor. He saw the flicker of movement, armored figures sweeping the area. He closed the door quickly, his pulse quickening. "They're still here," he muttered. Lyra stepped closer, her pendant glowing softly in her hands. She pointed toward the far end of the hallway, then made a winding motion with her fingers. Ethan guessed she meant there was another way out. A sudden metallic thud came from the other side of the wall. Someone was checking rooms. Ethan didn't have time to think. He gestured for Lyra to follow. They slipped into the corridor, keeping low, moving quickly. The sound of footsteps and radio chatter grew louder behind them. They reached a junction where the hallway split in two. Lyra pointed sharply to the left. Ethan hesitated. The left corridor led toward the maintenance sections where workers sometimes got lost for hours. But there wasn't time to argue. They ran, their boots thudding softly against the metal floor. Every turn felt like it could lead to safety or straight into a trap. Once, they nearly collided with a pair of patrolling guards. Ethan yanked Lyra into a narrow storage alcove, pressing his back against the wall as the guards passed. They were so close that Ethan could hear the faint buzz of their armor systems. Lyra held her breath, her hand gripping his sleeve tightly. Only when the footsteps faded did they slip back into the corridor. The maintenance deck was darker, lit only by flickering strips along the floor. Pipes hissed overhead, releasing bursts of steam. The smell of oil and metal filled the air. Lyra moved with surprising confidence, weaving through the maze of equipment as if she had been here before. Ethan followed close behind, trying to keep quiet despite his pounding heart. They passed a broken service hatch, and Ethan caught sight of something strange, a faint blue mark on the wall. It was the same symbol Lyra had drawn earlier. She noticed him looking and nodded, pointing toward it, so these marks were guiding her. But who had put them here? They were almost at the far end of the maintenance deck when a loud shout echoed behind them. "Stop right there." Ethan turned to see 3 guards running toward them, weapons ready. He grabbed Lyra's hand, and they bolted. The chase began in full, their footsteps pounding against the metal floor. Lyra pulled him toward a side passage so narrow that the guards had to slow down to squeeze through. They darted through, leaping over cables and ducking under pipes. The air grew warmer, the hum of machinery louder. They were near the engine section now. The heat and noise worked in their favor. Masking their movements, Ethan spotted a small lift at the end of the passage. "Go," he urged. They slid inside, and he slammed the control button. The lift shuddered to life. descending fast through the grate in the floor. Ethan saw the guards reach the passage just as the lift dropped out of sight. The lift opened into a cramped tunnel lined with maintenance bots. Lyra wasted no time. She darted forward, following another faint blue mark on the wall. Ethan glanced back and saw the lift starting to come down after them. "They're not giving up," he muttered, hurrying. To catch up, the tunnel opened into a wider chamber filled with towering fuel tanks. It was warmer here, the air thick with the smell of coolant. Lyra ran straight toward a narrow hatch on the far side. Ethan could hear voices echoing in the distance. The guards had found their trail again. Lyra dropped to her knees and pressed her pendant to a small panel beside the hatch. The panel beeped softly, and the hatch slid open, revealing a ladder leading down. Ethan climbed in after her, pulling the hatch closed just as the sound of boots entered the chamber above. The ladder took them into a completely different section. Silent, cold, and abandoned. Dust floated in the dim light, and the air smelled stale. Ethan looked around and realized this part of the station hadn't been used in years. Lyra looked back at him, her eyes calm now. She had led him here for a reason, and Ethan had a feeling he was about to find out what it was. The air in this part of the station was colder. Ethan rubbed his arms as he followed Lyra through the dusty corridor. The lights here were dim and flickered every few seconds, sending long shadows crawling across the walls. Every step they took echoed too loudly, reminding him just how empty this section was. "This place hasn't been used in years," Ethan muttered under his breath. Lyra glanced over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. She pointed ahead where the corridor split, then took the left path without hesitation. Ethan followed, his boots kicking up a thin layer of dust from the metal floor. The walls here were lined with strange machines. Some were covered in tarps, others stood exposed, their panels open and wires spilling out like the insides of a wounded beast. Ethan had worked maintenance for years, but he didn't recognize half the equipment. It was older, heavier, built for something far more complex than fixing docking clamps or patching hull leaks. They turned a corner, and Ethan saw it, the symbol. The same one Lyra had drawn for him earlier, burned into the wall with deep, blackened edges. It looked fresh. Someone had been here recently. Lyra stopped and touched the mark gently, as if confirming they were in the right place. "What is this deck?" Ethan asked quietly. Lyra didn't answer with words. Instead, she pointed down the hallway to a massive blast door. It stood twice as tall as Ethan. Reinforced with thick metal struts, a heavy lock mechanism sat in the center, glowing faint. Red Ethan frowned. That door's sealed. No one gets through without he stopped when he saw Lyra step forward. She took her pendant in both hands and pressed it into a small circular slot in the lock. The glow of the lock changed from red to green, and with a deep groan, the blast door began to open. A rush of stale, cold air spilled out, carrying a faint metallic scent. Beyond the door was a chamber unlike anything Ethan had seen. Rows of glass pods lined the walls, each one fogged over. With shapes barely visible inside, strange consoles glowed faintly, their displays written in an alien script Ethan couldn't read. Ethan stepped inside cautiously. "What is this place?" Lyra walked to the nearest pod and wiped away a patch of condensation. Inside, Ethan saw another alien, skin the same silver blue as hers, lying perfectly still. Eyes closed. They weren't dead, but they weren't awake either. It was like they were frozen in time. Ethan turned to Lyra, shock written on his face. "These are your people," he said slowly. Lyra nodded once, her eyes glistening. She touched the glass of the pod gently, whispering something in her own language. Her voice cracked halfway through. Ethan began to understand. This wasn't just about her escaping. She was trying to find them. Whoever ran this station wasn't just holding her. They were keeping her people here too. But before Ethan could ask more, a noise made them both freeze, the sound of boots. It was faint, but getting closer, echoing through the open blast door. Lyra's eyes darted to the far side of the chamber, where another door stood partially open. She grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him toward it. They slipped through into a narrow side room. It was filled with crates, strange tools, and a large map projected on the wall. Ethan realized it was a layout of the station, but with sections marked that he had never seen before. Some of them glowed red, others green. Lyra pointed at one green section far from their current location. She tapped her chest, then pointed at it again. Ethan guessed it was their next destination. The sound of boots grew louder. They didn't have much time. Ethan scanned the crates quickly, looking for anything that might help. His eyes landed on a small case filled with keycards and data chips. He grabbed a few at random and shoved them into his pocket. If they were going to get out, they might need them. Lyra peeked through the crack in the door. The guards had entered the chamber with the pods, their voices sharp and suspicious. Ethan's pulse quickened. If they searched carefully, they'd find the open side door. Lyra gestured toward a vent in the corner of the room. It was small, but just big enough for them to crawl through. Ethan nodded. They climbed inside, the metal groaning softly under their weight. The vent was dark and tight, forcing them to move slowly. Every sound felt like it would give them away. They crawled for what felt like minutes until they reached another grate. Through it, Ethan could see the maintenance tunnels below. He kicked. The grate opened carefully, and they dropped down one by one. The air here was warmer and smelled faintly of fuel. They were closer to the active parts of the station again. Lyra turned to him, her face serious. She pointed back in the direction they had come from, then made a motion like locking a door. She was warning him that deck wasn't just forbidden, it was dangerous. Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't know what was waiting for them in that green-marked section of the map, but he knew one thing: they couldn't turn back now. The maintenance tunnel stretched ahead like a long, narrow throat. Ethan moved first, his boots clanging softly on the grated floor. Lyra followed close behind, her steps light but quick. They had escaped the forbidden deck, but the images of those glass pods still haunted Ethan's mind. Dozens of her people, trapped, frozen, waiting. It made his skin crawl. They reached a hatch at the end of the tunnel. Ethan pressed the release, and it hissed open, revealing a dimly lit storage bay. The air here smelled of old fuel and metal dust. It seemed abandoned, though faint vibrations underfoot told him they were still close to the main power systems. Lyra stepped past him, scanning the room with sharp, alert eyes. She moved to a stack of empty crates and sat down slowly for the first time since he had met her. She looked less like someone running and more like someone thinking. Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "All right," he said quietly. "I need to know what's going on." Lyra looked at him, her expression tense. She hesitated, then pointed to herself. "Lyra," she repeated. He nodded. "Yes, Lyra." Then she pointed at the pendant around her neck. She lifted it so the faint light from its core spilled across her hands. "This," she said, tapping it, "is key." Ethan frowned. "A key to what?" She tapped the pendant again, then made a sweeping motion with her hand. "Like drawing a circle in the air. Worlds," she said slowly. Ethan blinked. "You mean?" "Your home worlds." She nodded once, firmly. Through slow, careful words and many gestures, the story began to take shape. Lyra was not just any alien girl. She was the daughter of a high leader among her people. Her pendant was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of her position, recognized by her people's governing council. Whoever held it could speak for her world, make treaties, or even surrender in her name. Her voice trembled as she spoke, switching between broken English and her own language when she couldn't. Find the right word. The humans who controlled this part of the station had captured her during what was supposed to be a diplomatic meeting. They had taken her here, hidden her away, and kept her people imprisoned in those glass pods to force her compliance if she handed over the pendant willingly. They could fake her surrender and control her people without firing a shot. Ethan felt his stomach twist. So they want you. And that key? He said slowly. Lyra nodded, her eyes dark with anger. And my people, she whispered. Her voice was almost a growl. They take. All. Ethan looked away, thinking hard. He had worked for the station for years, but he had never heard whispers of something like this. He had thought the place was corrupt in small ways, smuggling, bribes, shady trade deals, but this was on another level entirely. This was slavery dressed as diplomacy, and now he was in the middle of it before he could speak again. A sharp beep echoed through the bay. Ethan froze. Lyra stiffened, clutching her pendant. The sound came again, a faint electronic ping from somewhere in the ceiling. Ethan's eyes darted upward and found it, a small, blinking sensor. They've found us, he hissed. Lyra stood instantly, her fear replaced with urgency. She pointed toward a side door, half hidden behind cargo nets. Ethan didn't argue. He grabbed his pack and followed her. The door led into another narrow passage, this one lined with heavy pipes. The air grew warmer as they moved, the sound of machinery pulsing through the walls. Ethan realized they were getting closer to the engine sections again. Good for losing pursuers, bad if they hit a dead end. Lyra kept glancing back at him as if checking that he was still following. At one point, she slowed, reaching out to grip his arm. You? Help me, she said, her voice low. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Ethan met her gaze. Yes, he said simply. It surprised him how certain he was of the answer. They reached a security checkpoint, or what used to be one. The control panels were dark, the guard post empty. Lyra stepped inside and began searching through the drawers. Ethan kept watch, but his mind was spinning. If her story was true, and he had no reason to doubt it, then helping her escape wouldn't just save one life, it could start a war. She found what she was looking for, a small control module with a portable power cell. She attached the cell to the module and pressed a sequence of buttons. A small holographic map sprang to life above it. Ethan recognized it as the one they had seen earlier in the side room. The station layout with colored sections. Lyra pointed to the green-marked area again. That, she said firmly, safe. Ethan studied it. It wasn't far, but it was close to the outer docking rings, a perfect place to stage an escape. If they could reach it without being caught, he nodded. Slowly, all right, we get to the green zone, he said. Lyra's lips curled in the smallest, faintest smile, but before they could move, the floor beneath them vibrated. It wasn't the normal hum of the station. It was heavier, sharper. A distant alarm began to wail. Ethan knew that sound lockdown protocol. They were sealing sections of the station, and if they didn't hurry, this one would be next. Lyra grabbed his hand without hesitation. Run, she said, and they did. The sirens screamed through the corridors. Flashing red lights bathed everything in a warning glow. Ethan and Lyra ran, their footsteps echoing against the metal walls. The station's automated voice boomed in both English and another language. Section C, lockdown in progress, evacuate or remain in place. Ethan knew what that meant. Doors sealing, blast shutters dropping. If they didn't reach the green zone soon, they'd be trapped. Lyra moved with surprising speed for someone so small. Her bare feet barely made a sound as she led him through the maze of corridors. Ethan's lungs burned, but adrenaline kept him moving. They turned a sharp corner and froze. 3 armed guards stood at the far end of the hallway. One of them shouted, "There, stop." The guards raised their rifles. Ethan didn't think he grabbed Lyra and pulled her into a side passage just as the first shots rang out. Sparks flew from the walls where the bullets struck. The air smelled of burning metal. The passage they had taken was narrow and dark. Pipes hissed overhead, dripping warm steam. They could hear the guards chasing after them. Ethan spotted a heavy service door ahead, through there. He said Lyra ran to it and pressed her glowing pendant against the lock. The door hissed open, revealing a dimly lit cargo lift. They jumped inside, and Ethan slammed the control lever down. The lift groaned and began descending through the gaps in the metal grate. They could see shadows moving above. One guard leaned over the railing. Aiming his rifle down, a burst of gunfire ripped through the air. Ethan yanked Lyra to the side, the bullets missing them by inches. The lift reached the bottom with a loud clang. They bolted out into a huge chamber filled with fuel lines and generator cores. The air was thick with heat and the sound of engines. Roared around them, Lyra pointed toward a far catwalk, that way. She shouted in her broken English. Ethan followed. But every step felt like moving through an oven. Halfway across the catwalk, an explosion rocked the chamber. Flames burst from one of the fuel lines, sending waves of heat across the platform. The catwalk trembled under their feet. Ethan grabbed the railing to steady himself. The explosion had set off the fire suppression system. Foam sprayed from the walls. Mixing with the smoke, visibility dropped instantly. They stumbled forward through the haze. Shadows moved in the smoke, not all of them friendly. A guard lunged from the side, swinging a baton at Ethan. Ethan ducked, grabbed the man's arm, and shoved him into the railing. The guard fell back, winded, and Ethan kept moving without looking back. Lyra reached the end of the catwalk and dropped down onto a lower maintenance bridge. Ethan followed, the metal groaning under his weight. The bridge led to a narrow service tunnel inside. The sound of the chaos behind them faded slightly. The tunnel was tight, forcing them to move single file. Lyra's pendant lit the way, casting long shadows across the walls. Suddenly, a heavy blast door began lowering at the far end. Ethan's heart sank. They're sealing it. He shouted. Lyra sprinted forward, the door inching closer to the floor. She slid under with seconds to spare. Ethan dove after her, the bottom edge of the door scraping the back of his boots as it slammed shut. They were safe from the guards for now, but they were in a new part of the station. The corridor here was cleaner, brighter. They had made it to the outer docking rings. Ethan could see large hangar doors ahead. Ships, small personal craft, sat in their bays. Some still powered down, others preparing to launch. Lyra didn't. Slow down. She pointed to a sleek silver shuttle in the corner bay. It was unlike the human ships, smoother, with flowing lines and faint blue markings along the hull. Ethan realized it must be alien-built, maybe even hers. They ran toward it, but another explosion shook the station. This one was closer. The lights flickered. An emergency klaxons blared louder than ever. A voice shouted over the intercom. All decks, prepare for containment breach. Ethan didn't know what that meant, but it sounded bad. They reached the shuttle's side hatch. Lyra pressed her pendant against the panel, and the hatch slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the air was cooler, cleaner. The walls were smooth and glowing faintly with pale blue light. Lyra jumped into the pilot's seat, her fingers moving quickly over the controls. Ethan strapped himself into the co-pilot's chair without being told. The shuttle hummed to life, the floor vibrating under them. On the hangar floor, guards were already rushing toward them, weapons raised. Ethan spotted the hangar's magnetic clamps locking onto the shuttle. They've got us locked, he shouted. Lyra's eyes narrowed. She flicked a series of switches, and the shuttle's engines roared. The clamps strained, sparks flying from their connection points. With a final shudder, the shuttle broke free. Ethan was slammed back in his seat as they shot forward. The hangar doors began to close, but the shuttle slipped through just in time. Out in space, the blackness stretched endlessly. But there was no time to breathe. Two station patrol craft were already on their tail. Lyra angled the shuttle sharply. Dodging incoming fire, Ethan manned the secondary controls. Firing bursts from the rear cannons. One patrol ship veered off, trailing smoke. But the other stayed close. A warning light flashed red on the console. Ethan didn't need to understand alien language to know it meant trouble, faster. He urged. Lyra's hands moved like lightning. And suddenly the stars outside stretched into long streaks of light. With a deep hum, the shuttle jumped into hyperspace, leaving the station and its hunters far behind for the first time. That night, there was silence. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Lyra looked over at him, her expression softer now. She touched her pendant and then pointed to him. "Saved," she said simply. Ethan managed a small smile. "Not done yet," he replied. The stars outside the shuttle shimmered like silver dust scattered across a black sea. Ethan sat back in the co-pilot's seat, still feeling the rush of their escape. His hands trembled slightly, but he tried to hide it. The danger was behind them for now, but he knew it wasn't truly over. Lyra sat in the pilot's chair, her eyes fixed on the glowing readouts. The soft light reflected off her silver-blue skin, giving her an almost ethereal glow. For the first time since she had entered his life, she didn't look scared. She looked calm, almost relieved, but Ethan could still see the weight she carried in her posture. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice softer than before. "You saved me." Ethan glanced at her, unsure how to respond. "I guess we saved each other," he said with a small smile. Her eyes met his, and for a moment they simply looked at one another, the hum of the ship filling the space between them. She touched her pendant gently, as if reminding herself it was still there. "This for my people," she said. Ethan nodded. "I understand," he replied. Lyra hesitated, then added, "Not only key. It is promise." She struggled for the next words, her brow furrowing. "My father. Leader, he'd give me this, to protect. Even if I die." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "And those people in the pods. They're part of your family, too." She shook her head, then nodded slowly. "Some family. Some leaders. Some warriors. All important." Her voice was steady now, but there was sadness behind it. "They take them to make my people bow." Ethan felt a cold anger rise in his chest. "They won't stop, will they?" he asked quietly. Lyra's gaze turned back to the stars. "No," she said simply. "They will follow until they think I am gone. Or they win." For a while, neither of them spoke. The shuttle drifted in the calm of hyperspace, its controls softly pulsing with light. Ethan found himself staring out at the stars, thinking of everything that had happened in such a short time. A day ago, he had been just another repair worker on a station. Now he was a fugitive alongside an alien girl who carried the fate of her people around her neck. Finally, Lyra broke the silence again, when safe. "I go to my world," she said. Her voice carried both determination and a hint of something else. Hesitation. Ethan tilted his head. And then she looked at him, her eyes unreadable. "Then I fight for them," she said. "But I remember you." Ethan chuckled softly. "Remember me?" "I'm not that hard to forget." But her expression didn't change. "No," she said firmly. "You helped me when no one else did." "I not forget." Her words stayed with him. He hadn't thought much about what would come after, only about getting her out alive. But now the reality hit him. She had a home to return to, a people to save, and well, he had burned his bridges with the station. There was no going back for him either. "Where exactly are we going right now?" he asked, Trying to focus on the present, Lyra tapped a blinking point on the nav display. It showed a star system far from any human trade routes. Old friend. Safe place. There we plan, she said. Ethan nodded slowly, and after that, you go fight your war. She didn't answer right away. But her silence was answer enough. As the minutes passed, the shuttle systems beeped softly, signaling. Their approach to the destination, outside, the swirling blur of hyperspace began to slow. The stars returned to their normal pinpoints of light. Ahead, a small green and blue planet came into view, floating like a jewel in the dark. Lyra's hands moved over the controls with practiced ease. The shuttle descended toward the planet, breaking through thin wisps of atmosphere below. Ethan could see forests stretching to the horizon, rivers glittering like silver threads in the sunlight. It was peaceful, a sharp contrast to the chaos they had left behind. They landed in a secluded clearing surrounded by tall trees. When the engines powered down, the silence felt strange. Ethan unstrapped himself and stood, stretching his sore muscles. Lyra rose as well, her pendant catching the light one last time before she tucked it under her wrap at the bottom of the ramp. The warm air of the planet hit them, carrying the scent of grass and flowers. Ethan looked around. So this is your safe place? Lyra nodded, then pointed to the trees where faint figures began to appear. They were her people, not many, but enough to greet her. One of them, an older alien with silver hair, stepped forward and bowed deeply. Lyra turned to Ethan, her voice low but steady. You safe here too? If you want, she said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You're offering me a place among your people. She nodded. You saved leader's daughter. You friend now. He didn't answer right away. The idea of staying here, away from human space, was tempting. But part of him knew this wasn't his fight. Then again, maybe it was now. After everything they'd been through, could he really walk away? Lyra seemed to read his hesitation. She stepped closer, her eyes locking on his. One day, I come back for you. If you not come with me now, she said. Her words carried the weight of a vow. Ethan smiled faintly. I'll hold you too. That they stood there for a moment, the sun casting long shadows around them. Somewhere above, the stars waited, carrying the memory of their escape and the promise they had made. And though the war ahead would be long, neither of them would face it alone.